All right, so this is lecture 4 of Rashi, His World, and the Origin of Ashkenazic Jews by Rabbi Lawrence Troster. This is May the 6th, and we are continuing with our study of Rashi's commentary on Genesis chapter 1.
Chapter 1, 21.
And we reached verse 21, and so in 21 is and we're on page 5 of the material. In verse 21, after talking about God creating the sea monsters and the living creatures that creep and the birds, actually the text should be 122. We're moving on to verse 22. So, Suzanne, you want to read where it's verse 22 for us?
Mm-hmm. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and increase, fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day.
Okay, so notice this is the first time that the word blessing is used, and God blesses them and says, in effect, the same thing that God will say to the humans. Be fruitful and multiply, but here it says, fill the waters, as opposed to fill the earth later on. So let's take a look at what Rashi has to say. This is on page 5 in a material down towards the bottom. Go ahead, Suzanne.
And bless them.
Yep.
Because people decimate them and hunt them and eat them, they required a blessing. And the beasts also required a blessing, but because the serpent was destined to be cursed, he did not bless them, lest he, the serpent, be included. Meaning
the the lizards and so on were not blessed. But notice, people hunt birds and fish in great numbers, and so they have to be especially blessed,
Wow.
right? Otherwise, they'll get wiped out.
Wow.
Okay, and of course we know that before modern times, especially, though fish and flocks of birds could be so big as to darken the sky, like the carrier pigeon. But humans can decimate even all of that, can wipe out an area where there are fish, even before modern times. Mm-hmm. They can overfish, they can overhunt. And the way people tended to get birds, by the way, was they would put nets in the forests and then beat the trees so that the birds would fly into the nets. Okay, and of course people gathered eggs. Before chickens were domesticated, people would go into the woods and collect birds' eggs. So you combine all of those, you could very easily wipe out the existence of a species in an area. Okay, read the next one, be fruitful.
From the Tanakh?
No, from here, yeah.
Fruitful. The word is derived from
Peru, right.
Fruit, meaning produce fruits.
In other words, it's the same root as the word pri, meaning fruit, like bre pri hagafen, and therefore be fruitful, be, like fruit coming out on a tree. Go on and multiply.
And multiply. If he had said only be fruitful, one would beget one and no more. And multiply was therefore said so that one could beget many. Well,
this is going to have an implication when we get to humans. In other words, how do you fulfill the mitzvah of fruitful and multiply?
Right.
Okay, so he's interpreting it that the one means give birth, generate offspring, but not just one, but many. Okay. Now we go back to the text, verse 124.
So
yeah.
Hasidim take that very...
Well, it's not just Hasidim, but it's in other words, if you look at the halachas, you will see, how do you fulfill that mitzvah? There's different interpretations of it. Okay, Suzanne, you want to read?
Okay,
We're back to 124. God said,
let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind. And it was so. Okay, now here, interesting, you'll notice the earth is the agent of creation, whereas the water brought forth the fish and the birds and some of the reptiles, it would seem. The earth becomes the agent of God's creation. In other words, God just doesn't say, let there be, but let the earth bring forth. That's an interesting point, right? Okay. And let's now look at back to the bottom, page 5. That is what I explained, verse 14, that everything was created on the first day, and they required only to be brought forth.
Remember, back earlier he said that in fact there was only one act of actual creation from nothing. That is the totality of creation. And now it's just everything has to be brought forth, put in its place. In other words, it's sitting there in potential within the earth, so to speak. That all these creatures are already inside the earth, almost, so to speak, waiting to come out. That's a really interesting thought, isn't it? Because that's not the way we normally think of things when we look at this text. But it's as if everything is created almost sleeping in stasis, and then when God says, let it come forth, it comes forth. All right, living creatures.
Which have life.
Right, again. All right, now we're on page 6.
And creeping things. These are the creeping things which are low and crawl upon the earth and appear as if they are dragging along, because their movement is not discernible. Every expression of, whatever.
Sherets or remesh.
Is translated in our language, Old French, as conmovres, crawling creatures.
So that's what he means. Okay, again, he has to resort to the la'az. That's what it actually says in our language. In our la'az, the safartit, the French la'az, the French Jewish vernacular, crawling creatures. Okay. All right, let's go on.
Back to 125?
Yeah, 125.
Okay, God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on the earth, and God saw that this was good.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and made. He fixed them in their complete form and in their full stature.
All right, in other words, that where it says God made them, it's to say that the form in which they exist is one that God has now set. And of course, this is, the medieval attitude was that what we would call species are eternally set in a particular form. They don't change. There's no notion of evolution here, right? In other words, creation has a fixed number of species. They are in fixed forms. They can be wiped out, but that's the way things are. There's no sense of what we would call evolutionary change in the natural world. Things change only in the sense that things are born, live, die, go back into the earth. Their matter is recycled into other things, but there is no sense of a dynamic change. There is constant movement, but it's more of a series of recycling, you might say, cycles, but no sense of, you've got a species and it's going to evolve into another species, or there's this long history where we have previous species like dinosaurs. That does not exist at this time. That does not exist. And when people found dinosaur bones, they thought that they were the bones of, the Nephilim, the giants who once roamed the earth, or the sea monsters. In other words, they fit if they found any of these things, which they did occasionally, they just fitted into their worldview with this, what one scholar called the great chain of being, that there is this hierarchy from God down through the angels to humans, to animals, to plants, to non-life, and it is a fixed order that is eternal. Okay. Muriel, do you want to pick it up then in 126? So read it in the Tanakh, first of all,
Sure.
126.
And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth.
Okay, so questions that arise from this, of course, is who's the us, right? Mm-hmm. And notice, if you look just a little bit forward to verse 27, and God created. In other words, the word is the special word for God's creation, and even though he says let us make, and the verb there is na'aseh, which is the making, is like physical making or working. God creates the human in a special creation, God does not say, let the earth bring forth the human. Okay, so this is a special category of creature that is now being created. So, all right. So, Muriel, you want to go to Rashi now on page 6?
Let us make man. From here we learn the humility of the Holy One. Blessed be he. Since man was created in the likeness of the angels, and they would envy him, he consulted them, and when he judges kings, he consults with his heavenly household. For we find regarding Ahab that Micah said to him, I saw the Lord seated on his throne, and the host of heaven were standing by him, on his right and on his left.
Stop there for a second. So, this is important. Obviously, Rashi believed in angels and that there's an angelic court. So, he sees the fact that God is going to consult with his courtiers as a sign of God's humility, because he was afraid that since humans have a likeness similar to the angels might become envious. Now, this is a really interesting idea. And Rashi's picking up on something that I think is very clear in the Hebrew Bible, that humans are the earthly equivalents of the angels. In other words, there's a particular kind of the servants of God. You have the celestial kind and you have the earthly kind, and they resemble one another. All right, that's why angels show up in human form, because they're essentially the same form, but they're made of different substance, because the human is earthly and the angel is celestial. So, but in some parts of rabbinic literature, angels are not supposed to have emotions like envy. In other words, angels, if a human has a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, an inclination toward the Yetzer Hara, often translated as evil inclination, but really our egoistic motivation, what Freud would call our id, which is our emotions and our needs that can end up doing evil things, but includes things that can be like jealousy and things like that. We also have the Yetzer Tov, which is our altruistic impulse. Angels are only supposed to be Yetzer Tov. They're not supposed to have that ability to feel envy and desire and needs, because they're celestial, they're not earthly, they don't have the same things. But rabbinic literature is not consistent. and sometimes you have to see this more in a homiletic way rather than a strictly theological discussion, right? I mean, if Maimonides were, saying something, he wouldn't believe that angels could be envious. He would reinterpret the Midrash as just being homiletical, but Rashi's quoting it. Now, he interestingly enough, he says it's as if he does this when he's concerning to judge a king, and there's this incident in 1 Kings 22 where a prophet Micah is talking to Ahab, and he says, I had a vision of God sitting on his throne, and the hosts of heaven were standing by him on his right and his left. Now, Rashi's going to deal with what does it mean, right and left. Read on, Muriel.
Now, do left or right apply to him?
In other words, it's got to have a right hand and a left hand. Go on. But rather,
the passage means that these angels were standing on the right to defend, and these angels were standing on the left to prosecute. Likewise, Dan 4:14, by the degree of the destructive angels in the matter, and by the word of the holy ones is the edict. Here too he took counsel with his heavenly household. He said to them, among the heavenly beings there are some in my likeness. If there are none in my likeness among the earthly beings, there will be envy among the creatures of the creation.
So, in other words, the right side is the side of the defense, and the left side, typical left bias, anti-left bias, is the side of the prosecution. So this is what we're talking about. 1 second, Sam. That we're talking about the idea that if God is going to make this creature, there's going to be, the angels are going to argue it out first. And he cites other verses to show you that this, in fact, happens. And he then gives another rationale for the creation of humans, that the angels have a likeness to God. And so there's got to be similar on earth, otherwise the creatures on earth will fight amongst themselves as to say who is, as it were, the top, right? Yes, Sam?
I have this book on Rashi by Saperstein,
Yes.
and a slightly different translation.
Yeah.
It says on the left, arguing for innocent, that's on the left, that's on the right, and on the left, arguing for guilt, which may be saying the same
Yeah,
thing.
it's pretty much the same thing. It's just, you can translate it either way. Okay. All right. Read on. So having given us this one set of midrash, right? And you see the reference there from Tanchuma and Genesis Rabbah. He's now going to give us a second midrash on the same phrase.
Let us make man, even though the angels, did not assist him in his creation, and there is an opportunity for the heretics to rebel, to misconstrue the plural as a basis for their heresies. Scripture did not hesitate to teach proper conduct and the trait of humility, that a great person should consult with and receive permission from a smaller one. Had it been written, I shall make man, we would not have learned that he was speaking with his tribunal, but to himself. And the refutation to the heretics is written alongside, i.e., in the following verse. And God created, and it does not say, and they created.
So here, because it says, let us make man, the minim, the heretics, and this is a swipe at the concept of the Trinity, by the way, might say that this is proof for a multiplicity within the divinity. Okay? But he says that it's not about that. It's about teaching humility. And his proof that it was only, even though God says, let us make man, in the end, the verb, when it actually says that God created, is singular. Now, Christians might say this is a proof of the idea that the Trinity is 3 and plus into 1, right? Multiplicity into the singular, but leaving that aside, this is very likely a swipe at the concept of Trinitarianism. All right. Read the next one. In our image.
In our image, in our form.
Yes. And the next one.
After our likeness, to understand and to discern.
So Rashi is interpreting this double phrase, right? Let us make man in our image. Bitsalmenu kidmutenu. So Tselem and Demut. And of course, in the guide for the perplexed, Maimonides has a lot of discussion on these two words and what they mean to show that they don't mean actual anthropomorphic shape. And it refers to consciousness and sentience. But Rashi, not being a philosopher, has no problems with the idea that there is a kind of divine manifestation, and this is actually closer to biblical theology, that is human-like in shape. He has no problems with what we would call anthropomorphism. Okay? So that's why he says, in our image, he is interpreting Selem to mean a human-like form. Or rather, humans are the form of the humans. 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, and a torso, reflect the divine shape. He's completely, he hasn't got a problem with that. Again, this is not Jewish philosophy in Sfarad or North Africa. This is, you might say, a little, and of course, even when Maimonides puts in the Mishnah Torah that it is part of the mitzvah and believing that God is one, that you cannot believe that God has a form, commentators in his own day says that there's nothing wrong with that. to believe that God has an actual form. Okay? Now, notice he says he takes after our likeness, demut, to mean to understand and to discern. Here he is taking the notion that human sentience and consciousness is different than animals, and it is part of our godlike characteristic. So, that, of course, for Maimonides, that was the totality of both words, really, ultimately. But this is the way Rashi that sees two different meanings from the two terms. They're not just redundant, or kind of expression of something, emphasizing by using two words to mean the same thing. Okay, he sees them very distinct. All right, read the next one, and they shall rule over.
And they should rule over the fish.
Hebrew, vayirdu.
This expression contains both the meaning of ruling and the meaning of subservience. If he merits, he rules over the beasts and over the cattle. If he does not merit, he becomes subservient to them, and the beast rules over him.
This is from the Midrash Rabbah, and they're picking up the fact that the word for rule, the root can also be read yarad, which means to go down. So if they merit, they'll go up. They will be the rulers of the beasts. If they don't merit, they will go down and not be the rulers of beasts. So, some people cite this as being, in my environmental circles, they consider this a bad thing, what's called dominionism, where humans are given dominion over creatures to do whatever they want. That's a misreading of the text, as you will see. Rashi quotes the rabbinic idea that human superiority or human rule over animals is not absolute, but dependent on their moral behavior. In other words, the only reason why we have any authority over the animals, according to this, is by the grace of God's will over and can be changed if we don't deserve it. Okay, and one can go to the Bible and see that some of the prophets talk about when humans are sinning. Of course, one of the things is that everything goes back and the wild animals take over and all that kind of thing. So you can see how this has certain roots.
Which word was it that had the double?
Vayirdu. Okay, and they shall rule. Okay. All right. Look at 120. Muriel, read 127.
In the Tanakh?
Yeah, in the Tanakh.
Okay. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
Okay, so now we have this interesting thing. God actually goes ahead and does the creation, but then all of a sudden it adds the words male and female. He created them. And this is a very odd sentence because it says, God created man, singular. And again, we have to look at the word man more as earthling. God created the earthling, not man with a, because it says et ha'adam, created the earthling is a better translation. In his image, in the image of God, he created him or it. Male and female created them. So what is going on here in this verse, the singular and then the gender split? Because male and female, of course, uses the term zachar for male, nikeva for female. So Adam seems to be human being in the broadest sense, or earthling, and then we get down to the gender division. Okay, so Muriel, you want to read now at the bottom, page 6, and God created man?
God created man in his image, in the form that was made for him. For everything else was created with a command, whereas man, was created with the hands of God, as it is written. In
Psalms
139:5. And you placed your hand upon me. Man was made with a die like a coin, which is made by means of a die, which is called
Coin.
in Old French. And so Scripture states, Job 38:14.
Job.
Job. The dye changes like clay.
This is an interesting little point, again, that God has created directly with the hands of God, of course, which is, we actually see that in the next chapter of Genesis. Man was made with a dye, meaning like stamping out coins, so that everyone is from the same stamp. Okay, and there is a text that actually is found in the Mishnah about how the difference is that whereas coins are stamped out and every single one is the same, the dye which God stamps out humans is the form of God, but everyone is different. So there's both similarities and differences in humans, which, all right. And now let's take a look. Go on, top of page 7 in the material. In the image of God, he created him.
In the image of God, he created him. It explains to you that...
Do you guys need another copy, by the way? From last week?
Yes, please.
I reminded you to bring one.
He wasn't
If you have an extra
But he
one,
sent it also.
I sent it out also.
I didn't bring it. Thanks,
Okay. Go ahead.
It explains to you that the image that was prepared for him was the image of the likeness of his creator.
Okay, so just emphasizing that the human image is the image of God. Okay, now we get to the male and female. Go ahead.
Male and female, he created them. Yet further, 2:21 scripture states, and he took one of his ribs.
So in Genesis 2, the woman is created as a separate and special creation, and here there is, so he now has to reconcile Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Go on, the Midrash Agadah.
Midrash Agadah, Genesis...
Don't worry about that.
Explains that he originally created him with two faces, and afterwards he divided him. The simple meaning of the verse is that Scripture informs you that they were both created on the sixth day, but it does not explain to you how they were created, and it explains that to you elsewhere.
Okay, so this is interesting. He's giving us the drash and then what he considers the pshat. The drash is a very famous midrash that in Genesis 1 you have a creature of two sexes. That it is a double creature with two faces and two fronts. One side is male, the other side is female, and they're together. And that in Genesis 2, what you have is God splits them apart. Does anybody know, does this sound at all familiar to anybody?
I've heard it.
Yes, and that the splitting, and that our job is to try to become one.
Yeah, that's this great drash we use on weddings. Yes, I've used it many times. But it actually, there's a source for this that isn't Jewish. Does anybody know?
Isn't the Greeks or the Romans?
The Plato. It's in Plato.
Yeah.
It's in Plato. I think in the Symposium when they're talking about love. And there's this legend that humans started as double-backed creatures. But interestingly enough, some of those double-backed creatures were men and women. Some of them were men only, and some of them were women only. And in Plato's Symposium, they talk about the idea that love is to try and find your other half, okay, which could include same sex, okay, to explain homosexual love, all right? So what's interesting is this Greek thing, which is earlier than Rabbinic Midrash. Plato is earlier, and of course, where Plato get it from, I don't know, but it probably predates Plato, somehow finds its way into Rabbinic Midrash and becomes very well known and very well established as a way of reconciling the two creations of the genders from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, because Genesis 1 seems to be what we would call an egalitarian creation, and Genesis 2 is one where the male is primary and the female is secondary. Now, he calls this the Midrash Agadah, meaning he's saying this is drash. The simple meaning, that's pshat, is that and this is the way he's already explained the differences between the two chapters, that Genesis 1 is a general description of creation, and a lot of the details, therefore, are retold in Genesis 2. So what you have here is they were both created on the sixth day, but it doesn't tell you how they were created. That comes in the next chapter. So he's giving us both explanations.
Details to follow.
Yeah, exactly. And he does that with other things too, by the way. Like the creation of the human itself is more detailed in chapter 2. And it was the way in which the rabbinic tradition reconciled what we know to be two completely separate sources. And interestingly enough, the opinion of many scholars is that, why are there two accounts of creation in the Torah? Is it just, an editor, not wanting to get rid of one of them? In fact, the answer is probably because they believed that they were complementary, that the rabbinic tradition actually picked up on what the redactor was doing when the two sources were put together in the Torah, that there is this idea that in the source, the redactor of the Torah, the final redactors of the Torah, that you can have multiple sources describing the same event because that's the way things are. You cannot have a single understanding of something, that you can have complementary perspectives, more than one. They all reveal a certain set of truth. This is an attitude you find in Hebrew biblical literature. And you can see that that there are 4 versions of the Ten Commandments, actually, or the Sinai event that have been stitched together so well that in some cases it's difficult to divide, to sort of find out, which source is what in one verse. But certainly there are numerous instances of this in the Torah where you have more than one perspective on the same event. And that's a very interesting attitude. It's a complementary perspective where truth is sort of here and you're trying to come at it from different angles and nobody can get it perfectly. So you give different views. Yeah.
There was 70 nations around the foot of Sinai, but there were different languages, and we all heard and saw different things.
Yeah, the midrash you're talking about is that everybody heard the voice of God in the voice of, in a way they all understood it, right? That's a rabbinic midrash, right? Yeah.
But the Torah is al pi Hashem, so Hashem has different views of the same incident.
No, that's the whole point is that the rabbis ended up saying that the Torah is spoken in the language of men. Okay, that even if it comes from God, it's spoken in, even if you believe that every word comes from God, it is nonetheless spoken in a form in which humans can understand it because, God, the language of God cannot be contained within human language. All right? Okay.
Rabbi, is it all right if I pass this around?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The article last week was from A Moment, not this edition, but another Moment magazine. And some people said they hadn't heard of it, so I just thought I'd bring it and let you take a look.
All right. Okay, Irma, why don't you pick up in 128? First read in the Tanakh, 128. And God bless them.
God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth."
Okay, so here God gives them a very similar blessing to the birds and the fish, but adds the phrase, and master it, right? Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, but then it says, V'chiv shuha uridu, and master and rule it. Okay, that's the addition that doesn't, so now he's going to discuss this. Go on, we're on page 7, and subdue it.
The vav is missing, allowing the word to be read
V'chiv shah,
the masculine singular imperative, to teach you that the male subdues the female, that she should not be a gad about it. It is also meant to teach you that the man, whose way it is to subdue, is commanded to propagate, but not the woman.
Now here, the word v'chivshuha, you'll notice in the vowels the word the sound u with the 3 dots going in an angle. But if you were to write it out, there would be a vav there, a consonant with a dot in the middle, which would give you the same pronunciation. So remember, I told you there's sometimes Hebrew words are what's called chaser, lacking, or malay, filling. And this is a chaser, that the u sound is not written out. And so he is saying, and again, this is a drash, that if you look at it, you can repoint it, you can put in different vowels without the u sound, because the vav isn't there. And what it means is it's the masculine singular imperative, meaning that the man is supposed to rule the female, the woman. But, okay, so that's the drash. But now he's going to give you a little bit of halacha, that based on this, that this is, the command is to the male only. Only men are required to fulfill the mitzvah of propagation. Women are not. Now, what's the implication for this? Obviously, a man can't propagate without a woman, but what it means is that women, if they don't want to or can't, because of health reasons, are not required to have children, whereas men are required to have children. Okay? Now, what happens is halakha then sort of interprets this, which Rashi doesn't go into, as to how many children is required to fulfill this mitzvah. This is considered the first mitzvah, at least in the Torah. Of the 613, it's the first one that shows up. There's only like 3 mitzvot in the book of Genesis, and this is the first. Okay?
I remember Rabbi Siegel used to say he did not fulfill the mitzvah because he had 2 daughters.
Well, that's it. The minimum is considered to be at least to have a father, a male, a son, and a daughter. Then you have this rabbinic idea that you're supposed to go beyond that to have more children, because this is a pre-modern idea, because so many children died before the age of 5. So that if you had a son and a daughter and you said, okay, that's it, that's not good enough, because they may not live to be adults. In other words, you have to have at least 2 that live to be adults so that they propagate, which is why then they said you had to have more. And of course, because there was primitive birth control, there was various forms of birth control in the ancient world. How effective they were, I have no idea. But nonetheless, people had more children because the expectation was that only a certain number of them would live to adulthood. And this is quite true. I mean, a woman might in fact have 13 live births in her lifetime, and only a few of them would survive to adulthood. And I mean, we actually have actual examples of that from medieval and later Jewish literature, like Gluckel of Hamelin had about 11 or 12 children that she gave birth to, but I think only about 3 of them survived when she's writing her memoirs. There's only 3 or 4 of her children are survived to adulthood. Yeah, Sam.
What does the absence of the vav mean, literally?
Well, it doesn't really mean anything literally. I mean, the point is that Hebrew can have that. The word can be spelled 2 different ways.
Which word is that now?
The word is chivshuha.
Which means?
Master it.
I see.
V'chivshuha. The shu part can be spelt with a vav or without a vav, and it's spelt without a vav. And Rashi's therefore following the Midrash, is taking this as an indicator of a different meaning. And this is how the Midrash plays with it, because if you only look at the text without the vowels, you can spell it either way. If the vav was there, you couldn't spell it either way. It would only be one meaning. But this allows them to. And they do this all the time, by the way. There's all kinds of midrashim that play around with with voweling, putting in different vowels in the consonants and coming up with a different meaning. Okay?
So, but in terms of the woman is not commanded to
Yeah.
propagate, but if one of the grounds for divorce is if a woman does not, if she hasn't
Yeah, but that means
fulfill that mitzvah.
the man can't fulfill his mitzvah if his wife can't have children. Okay, so it becomes grounds for divorce that after a certain number of years, if they're childless, a man can divorce his wife on that basis. Now, of course, that's only if you follow, a monogamy. In a polygamous situation, it's not a problem. Okay, but in Ashkenazic law, it became the standard. Polygamy was banned. They attribute it to Rabbeinu Gershom in the 10th century, but we actually don't know if Rabbeinu Gershom actually said that. But it became the Ashkenazic practice, and then it spread from Ashkenaz to most of the rest of the Jewish world, to the Sephardic Jews and whatever. Generally speaking, over time, everybody pretty well accepted this ban on polygamy. It was not accepted hard and fast in all Jewish areas. So in Spain, they, even though they ended up not allowing polygamous marriage, there was a acceptance of concubines, the plilegesh in Spain, and it was something that the rabbis condemned, but it happened. And in countries like Iraq and Yemen, they still practice polygamy. Not regularly, though. I mean, it's interesting that long before the ban on polygamy, you look in the Talmud, and none of the rabbis in the Talmud are ever seen to have been have more than one wife. And in rabbinic law, the second wife is referred to as tsara, meaning her tsuris, meaning the first wife's tsuris. Okay, seriously. And so when was polygamy practiced was when the first wife couldn't have children. They would take a second wife and I actually, when I was at Hebrew University back in 74, 75, and I was in this anthropology class with the late Dov Noy, who was a great Israeli anthropologist. One of the things as a project was I interviewed this elderly lady whose father was one of the founders of Machane Yehuda, one of the settlements outside the old city. In other words, the first settlement was the Montefiore ones, but there were Jews from Iraq and other places who built the area what is now called Machane Yehuda, and her father was one of those. So she was telling me this story, and then she said to me that her mother was her father's second wife. That his first wife could not have children, and therefore she said to him, "You'd better take another wife." So he married another woman as well. This is in the late 19th, early 20th century we're talking about. And the second wife had children, and this elderly woman was the daughter of the second wife. But the first wife lived happily with them. They were all together like one big family, and she remembered her quite clearly, a very nice lady and whatever. So into the 20th century, this was practiced. It was regularly done in the Yemenite Jewish community, so that when the Yemenite Jews were brought to Israel in the 50s, a number, not all of them, again, it's not something that everybody did. None of them had two wives. And of course, Israeli law reflects the ban on polygamy. So they didn't say to them, "You got to get rid of your other wife." They allowed them to continue to live, to have the second wife. But they said from now on, nobody can, take more than one wife. And that's how essentially today polygamy doesn't exist in the Jewish tradition in any community, as far as I know. But up until the 1950s, it was still practiced in certain communities.
Where was that?
Yemen.
That was in Yemen.
That was Yemen. There was a pretty very old Jewish community in Yemen, quite established, and they continued. They were outside of this. One of the communities that didn't accept this ban. Don't forget, the ban on polygamy was originally limited to 3 communities in Ashkenaz, the Rhineland communities of Speyer, Worms, and Mainz. It was a local ordinance. It did not have any authority beyond those 3 communities. And it was only by voluntary acceptance and influence that it spread. That's the interesting thing. It was not like some rabbi put a general ban for the whole Jews of the world. It was a very small, particular community ordinance of 3, the Shum communities, right? Speyer, Worms, and Mainz. It was only for them, but it spread through the rest of the Ashkenazic world and from Ashkenaz to Sfarad and other places. Yeah.
Has anybody extended it?
What do you mean extended?
It ended a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a kind of misnomer. The idea is that it actually technically, the idea that it had a sort of expiry date, I think is a myth. The fact is it had no authority beyond those three communities, no matter what. Okay, but everybody voluntarily accepted it and it became established Jewish custom. And you can understand why in Ashkenaz, it came in Ashkenaz because polygamy was banned in Christian Europe. It was not banned in Muslim countries. And so it would have been really problematic for Jews to practice polygamy in Christian countries. And it's not surprising that it spread to Sfarad when Spain began to be reconquered by the Christians.
It's not halacha.
Well, it had became halacha. That's the point. In other words, it's not one of the 613 mitzvot, but it became, and it's not even one of the rabbinic ordinances. It's not midrabanan, but it was one of those takanot, those community ordinances that gained authority by virtue of who supposedly promulgated it, and by voluntary acceptance. In other words, communities had the right to make ordinances of this kind. Sometimes, by the way, contradicting traditional halakha. Okay, when it came to divorce law, the local communities in Ashkenaz enacted some legislation that was really contrary to traditional halakha, but they could do so. They felt they had the authority to do this in numerous circumstances. And I think I mentioned to you the death penalty thing that in Spain that they didn't have in Ashkenaz. That's definitely a violation of traditional halakha, and yet they felt they had to do it. Oh, I didn't mention it to you. This came out in a different class. But the Jews of Spain had the right of putting their own members to death for the crime of slandering the community to the non-Jews, and they exercised it. We don't know. It probably started in Visigothic Spain, and it then continued in Muslim Spain. Most of the evidence we have for it comes from the 12th, 13th, and 14th century. But we actually know of specific circumstances where the Jewish community mutilated people if they felt it was necessary, meaning like cutting off their tongue or their nose, or putting them to death because they felt they did something that might cause a pogrom. And they knew it was contrary to halakha to do this, but they felt they were in a situation of martial law. And the Ashkenazic Jews, when in the 13th century, when this happened in the 13th century, in one particular instance, the family of the man who was put to death, claimed that the rabbis, and they were like the great rabbis of their day, including Shlomo ibn Adrat, who was the chief rabbi of Barcelona and the greatest halachic authority in Spain, great Talmudic rabbi, Talmudic authority. He wrote to the greatest Talmudic authority in Germany at the time, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, and said, here's what happened. What do you think? Were we within our right to do this? And Rabbi Meir said, yes, you were. And if we had the power here in Ashkenaz, we would do the same thing here. Okay? So, but this is technically contrary to Jewish law. You're not allowed to put people to death without a Sanhedrin. And there is no Sanhedrin. Okay? But they felt they were under martial law. So community ordinances could go, we have a very narrow view of what halakha is. It's kind of like, here it's written and it's either yes or no. No, it was a lot different then. The communities had wide authority to enact legislation on all kinds of issues that could force their members to do certain things. And the ban on polygamy was one of them. Okay. That's a long answer. Okay, now let's, Irma, read number 130. And you could start with 129. And God said,
God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so.
Okay, and now read the comment, 128, and it shall be yours for food.
Yeah, it will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth. He equated cattle and the beasts to man, regarding the food that they were permitted to eat. He did not permit Adam and his wife to kill a creature and to eat its flesh. Only every green herb they were all permitted to eat.
So Rashi is correctly interpreting the meaning of this, that originally the humans were vegetarians, that you're not allowed to kill a fellow creature. Plants are not considered creatures the way humans are. They don't have the breath of life, the nishmat chaim. I mean, this is again a very ancient and medieval perspective, that there is a sharp distinction between plants and animals. We know that there isn't such sharp distinction, but in those days they felt there was a sharp distinction. And what's the main distinction? Plants don't move. Creatures move. And that and the breath of life literally means the wind. And wind moves things, pushes things, causes things to move. So it is a form of what we would call energy that allows the creature, the animal creature, to walk, to move, to swim, to fly, to move from one place to the other. Plants, therefore, don't have it. Whatever they are, they don't move. Therefore, they don't have this same kind of essence, this energy, this basic energy. That's what is being picked up here. All right? So, the original humans are supposed to be vegetarians. Read the next one. When the sons of
Noah came, he permitted them to eat flesh, as it is said, every creeping thing that is alive, etc. Like the green herbs which I permitted to the first man, I have given you everything.
So this is very true, that there is a difference after the flood. And Noah is given in chapter 9 specific permission to eat animals. That somehow creation is not as pristine as it was before. That there's been a step down. That death has been introduced to the world. Killing has been introduced to the world. I mean, not just both animals and humans. Animals, because you already see, that Abel brings a animal sacrifice, right? So he has to have killed an animal, and then humans have killed each other. So what happens in this passage in chapter 9? The murder of humans is specifically prohibited, but the killing of animals for food is allowed as long as you don't eat the blood, which is a way of saying, on a certain level, it's better that you shouldn't have reached this level, but if you are, you're not allowed to eat the blood because it is a sign of the life that you are taking. Okay, so Rashi is picking, just explaining this, anticipating this. Okay, Cal, do you want to pick it up on 131 in the Torah, first of all? And God saw
all that he had made, and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
Okay, so the sixth day, Yom HaShishi. Go on.
Sixth day. Scripture added a hay on the sixth day, at the completion of the creation, to tell us that he stipulated with them, you were created on the condition that Israel accept the 5 books of the Torah. The numerical value of the hay is 5.
Now, what he's talking about here is if you look, for example, at the end of the 5th day, it says Yom Hamishi, a 5th day, whereas at the end of the 6th day, it says Yom Hashishi, the 6th day. The hay means the, but it also in the numerical system is 5. So the drash here is the hay, the addition of the hay, which means 5, is the idea that Israel is, that you were created only if you accept the Torah. All right, now he's going to give another explanation. Go on, another explanation.
Another explanation for the 6th day. They, the works of creation, were all suspended until the 6th day, referring to the 6th day of Sivan, which was prepared for the giving of the Torah.
Okay, so this is another drash, that if the Torah is given on the 6th day of Sivan, which is Shavuot, there's a connection between creation and the giving of Torah, as if to say, creation somehow is not completed until the giving of the Torah. Okay? Which actually one could defend that as an actual biblical idea, that there is something about that creation somehow is not completed until something later on. Now, in the Torah itself, that actually is the tabernacle. The priestly school, which wrote the first chapter of Genesis, believed that creation was not complete until the sanctuary was built. And you can see that in the way in which in Exodus 25, and forward, the way in which the description of the tabernacle is given is in 7 different specific commands by God that match the 7 days of creation, not exactly. The 6th command is the appointment of Bezalel, the architect and builder. That matches the creation of humans. The 7th command, this is just before the golden calf story, is a command for Shabbat. So the building of the tabernacle is the final act of creation, but it's done by humans, which means humans are partners with God in the completion of creation. So Rashi is picking up that same idea from the Midrash, but not the building of the sanctuary is what completes creation, but the giving of Torah on the 6th of Sivan. Yeah.
Does that imply that creation is an ongoing process? That it didn't happen and then stop? That's what you say?
That's a tricky question. The answer is yes and no. Some aspects of Jewish thought felt that creation was completed with the building of the sanctuary. That's it. Creation's finished. What we now do, once that is done, is we have to maintain it. We can disrupt it, we can destroy it, but we have to maintain it. There's another stream that says, yes, there's ongoing creation. Now, how is ongoing creation reflected? I mean, I would argue that the notion of both of these is in the Torah itself, that what is the most obvious example of ongoing creation in the created world?
New species.
Birth. Birth of all creatures and the growing of plants.
Yeah.
Think about it. The earth is the agent of creation, and the earth is which brings out plants. So the ongoing fertility of the earth, since earth is the primary agent of creation of the earthly things, is part of the ongoing creation from God, which, by the way, is why the land has to have a Sabbath. Okay, if ongoing creation requires a pause now and then to be replenished, you might say the energy of fertility has to be replenished once every 7 days in the human world. In the total world, it's once every 7 years. So that's one aspect of ongoing creation, is the fertility of the earth itself, which then results in the fertility of animals and humans. There's no doubt about it. Now, Maimonides felt that ongoing creation was to be found in the birth of new souls. That when a person is conceived, a new soul is created. And that's the only new thing that arises after the end of creation, is new souls. In other words, some people believe that there's a whole bunch of souls sitting in heaven waiting to be born.
Come down.
Right? And there's an old midrash saying that this is treasury of souls. It's called the guf, means the body, and when it's finished, it's, then the Messiah comes. But Maimonides believed that he didn't believe that there were pre-existent souls. He believed that new souls were born with each conception. And that's the ongoing creation. That's the new creation that happens. Okay? All right. Okay. Cal, do you want to pick it up? You were still reading, right? So keep reading, chapter 2, verse 1, and read all the way to the end of that paragraph, which is the middle of verse 4.
The heavens and the earth were finished, and all their array. On the 7th day, God finished the work that he had been doing, and he ceased on the 7th day from all the work that he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all work of creation that he had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created.
Now, our modern translation recognizes that chapter 1 really ends the middle of verse 4, and then a new source begins. Of course, in the chapters and verses were much later. I mean, in Rashi's day, they didn't have the manuscripts didn't reflect chapters or verses. Okay, so he will not reflect. He'll understand there's something new going on here, but he doesn't necessarily reflect our understanding of the way this is to be divided. Okay, but let's take a look on page 7. And God completed on the seventh day.
And God completed on the seventh day. Rabbi Solomon said, a human being of flesh and blood, who cannot exactly know his times and his moments, must add from the profane to the holy. In other words, he must add some time to the Sabbath. The Holy One, blessed be he, who knows his times and his moments exactly, entered it, the Sabbath, within a hair's breadth, and it therefore appeared as if he completed his work on that day.
Okay, this is a rather odd kind of thing. Okay, humans don't actually know because people didn't have watches when Rashi wrote this. They don't know what time it is exactly. They don't know exactly what time it is, but God knows exactly what time it is, and knows, therefore, can do it. God entered the Sabbath exactly on the moment it was supposed to, and therefore it appears as if he completed that work, but we know there's ongoing creation. All right, read another explanation.
Another explanation. What was the world lacking? Rest. The Sabbath came, and so came rest. The work was completed and finished.
So in all of, this is a nice little drash here, that when you look at all creation, the one thing that was not created was menucha, rest. So God has to give us rest as a specific act of creation. And that's what completes the world. Again, this is not meant as a theological idea. It's a homiletical idea. You can just see this. Can't you hear these are sermons? It's not like Maimonides. Okay, it's not philosophy. It's drush. Okay. All right. So Stephen, you want to read the next verse, starting. Well, actually, no. Cal, read. We're not quite finished yet. Read on. And blessed and hallowed.
Blessed and hallowed. He blessed it with manna, for on all the days of the week it descended for them, in the amount of an omer per person. Whereas on the sixth day each one received a double portion, and he hallowed it with manna, but it did not descend at all on the Sabbath. This verse is written with reference to the future.
So he's picking up on the idea that in verse 3 it says, God blessed the seventh day, and God declared, our translation says, declared it holy. Mm-hmm. So why is this double bless and hallow? And the Midrash says this refers to the manna, that when the manna shows up during the Exodus, you're not allowed to go and pick it on the seventh day. This is one of the first specific times when, after the Ten Commandments, where there is a law that refers to the Sabbath. And so because you're not allowed to go and gather it on the seventh day, a double portion comes on the sixth day, so you have enough food for the seventh. And that's the origin of having two challahs, representing the double portion of manna. Okay? So he's giving us this midrash that this is a foretelling of the future of the story of the manna. All right, read on. That God created.
That God created to do.
This is an odd, because the Hebrew is rather odd, where it says, because on it God ceased from all the work, literally all his work, which God created to do. That's the literal translation. Our translation says, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. So because the Hebrew is a little unusual, he's picking up on that God created to do. Why do you need to, it sounds like kind of redundancy there. Read on. The work
that was fit to be done on the Sabbath, he doubled up and did it on the sixth day, as explained in Genesis 1.
Okay. All right. So, one more. Verse 4. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. This is at the top of page 8. These
mentioned above.
Okay.
When they were created on the day that the Lord made. This teaches you that they were all created on the first day.
And again, he's reiterating that he believes that everything was created on the first day and everything else is just separating out. Go on. Another explanation.
Another explanation of the word
Behi baram.
He created them with the letter He, as it is written in Isaiah, for in Yah, the Lord, is the rock of eternity. With these two letters, Yud and He, the name, he fashioned two worlds, and it teaches you that that this world was created with a He.
So again, in the Hebrew, it's an unusual phrase, Behi baram. Why is there a He there? It's kind of seems to be not necessary. So he's saying that if you take a look in Isaiah 26:4, one of the words for God is Yud He Vav He, but also Yud He Yah, and so Yud and He represent two worlds, the upper world and the lower world. So the He means the lower world. Read on. There's a bracket here because we have other manuscripts have something else. Go on.
Other editions. It intimates that just as the He is open at the bottom, so is the world open for the repentant. The world to come was created with a Yud. Meaning
now it's not about the upper and lower worlds. Actually, I'm mistaken. He's not referring to the upper and lower world. He's referring to this world and the world to come, the afterlife. Go on.
He created with a Yud to tell you that the righteous at that future time will be few as a Yud, which is the smallest of the letters. Okay. This intimates that the wicked will descend below to see the netherworld, like the letter He, which is closed on all sides and open at the bottom. For them, the wicked, to descend through there.
Another great drash, right? Another, fire and brimstone. The righteous will be few, and if you aren't righteous, you'll go down. Okay? Yeah, I can just see these as sermons, given on a Shabbos morning or something like that. Yeah.
Do you feel that, to me it is that they see every letter as holy.
Yes, and having deep meaning.
Deep meaning, and they have to delve and find this meaning. But do you feel in some of these drash or sermons that they literally believed what they drew out of it?
That's a tough question because I would say, generally speaking, if you have a text that you consider to be holy and sacred and comes from God, then in some ways it's a secret code. Okay? Mm-hmm. It not only says what it says, but it has to be, on some level, a source of infinite meaning. So my answer would be that on a certain level, they believed that all of these drashes that they're deriving from letters and sounds and everything are already inherent in the text itself, because the text is not just the text. Mm-hmm. It is a code to be read, it's an entree into the wisdom of God itself. The question of literally, that's a tough one, because not everybody did believe it. Maimonides didn't, very clearly believe that all these midrashim are not to be taken literally. What did Rashi believe?
And some are, if not contradictory, different.
Well, that's the point. When you have a code, it can have multiple meanings. It can be almost have infinite meaning. That's the fascinating thing about it, is that it's almost like there is no single meaning to the text at all. Now, of course, the exemplars of this approach are the Kabbalists, who go way... Philo does this with his allegorical interpretations of the text, but the Kabbalists go way, way into this with their whole way of understanding the numbers and the letters and literally reading everything as standing for one of the aspects of the divine inner workings revealed in the tree of life, the Sefirot. So Rashi doesn't go to that extent, but he's in that good rabbinic tradition saying, there is, in a sense, an esoteric element to Torah because it is Torah. You know, if it's just a human text, it's different, right? Yeah, Irma.
How does that fit with the idea that the Torah is written in the language of men?
Yeah, but again, that's one quote from the Talmud, right? The Torah is written in the language of men, but it's not just the language of men. In other words, Nachmanides in the 13th century really explained this kind of well in his Torah commentary. He basically says the earthly Torah is a earthly version of the divine Torah. He says, just as angels, when they come on this earth, have to take on the guise of humans, so the Torah, when it was given, took on the guise of a human, of an earthly text. And that the real Torah is heavenly, is spiritual, and he calls the Torah black fire written on white fire.
Yeah.
And that's an incredibly, wonderfully rich. Now, he was also a Kabbalist, so you can understand that, but he gets it. He gets the idea that if you see the Torah as a divine revelation, it can't just be a text like any other text. There has to be something much more than that in it. Even if it's it's written in human language, but it's not an end result. It's an entree. It's like a spiritual gate that can lead you to much higher levels of meaning and understanding. And again, depending upon where you are and what your influences are, that's how deep you're going to go into it. And Rashi pretty well stays, he stays in the rabbinic understanding of these things. He's not going off into the Kabbalistic way, or he doesn't show actually much connection to even the mysticism that the pre-Kabbalistic mysticism that existed, in Ashkenaz and in other places. The Merkavah mysticism. He doesn't get into that stuff. I'm sure for his own reasons. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So, Stephen, you want to start reading when God made heaven and earth? This is on page 3, verse 4b of the Torah. When the Lord God made heaven and earth.
When the Lord God
earth and heaven.
Earth and heaven, when no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil.
Okay, stop there. So here we have a new creation story, and notice it begins in a totally different way, as you will see. It begins with land already there, but not much water yet. All right? In other words, if one of the chief characteristics of the creation story in Genesis 1 is lots of water, here it's not much water, which is one of the reasons why some people say the first chapter had to have been written in Babylon, where there was lots of water. And this was written in Eretz Yisrael, where water is always a problem. All right, so now go to our text on page 8. Was not yet on the earth.
Was not yet on the earth.
And the word in Hebrew is terem. The word not yet. Okay?
Every terem in Scripture has the meaning of not yet. It does not mean before. And it cannot be made into a verb form to say
hitrim, as one says, hikdim. Now, the word kedem is the word for before, but it has a verbal, most Hebrew words are tri-letter roots that can be both nouns or verbs. Terem, he says, is not. Go on.
This verse proves this, as well as another verse, Exodus 9:30.
Ki terem tir'un, you will not fear, not yet fear. Go on.
This verse, too, should be explained to mean that no tree was yet on the earth.
Targum Onkelos.
When the creation of the world was completed on the sixth day before man was created.
So this is very interesting because according to Genesis 1, the trees predated the humans. Here, the humans predate the trees. Okay, go on.
Neither did any herb of the field yet grow, had not yet grown, And on the third day, where it is written, let the earth bring forth.
Meaning now there's a contradiction between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2.
The plants, had not yet emerged, but they stood at the entrance of the ground until the sixth day. And why?
In other words, the plants were there, ready to go from Genesis 1, but Genesis 2 says they're not yet above the surface of the earth. And why? Read on, because
Not caused it to rain, because there was no man to work the soil, and no one recognized the benefit of rain. But when man came and understood that they were essential to the world, he prayed for them, and they fell, and the trees and the herbs sprouted.
This is interesting. Rashi picks up on the fact that chapter 2 is entirely anthropocentric, right? Chapter 1, humans are kind of like the pinnacle of creation, a special creation, but they're part of a whole process. Here, they are the center of the story. Without humans, there is no creation. So Rashi's picking up on that and quoting this midrash from the Talmud, that even rain did not start until humans prayed for it, till the first human prayed for it. And so the cycle of rain itself on the earth did not start before that the humans created it. This is incredibly anthropocentric. All right? Read on. The Lord God.
The Lord God.
Adonai is his name.
Elohim means that he is the ruler and judge over the entire world, and so is this defined everywhere according to its simple meaning, Hashem,
The Lord.
the Lord, who is ruler and judge.
Elohim. Now, this is an interesting point. The word for God in the first chapter is Elohim, only. In the second chapter, you have Yud-He Vav-He, Adonai Elohim. So why is there a difference between the chapters? Well, modern scholars say because it's two different sources, and the authors of the first chapter didn't really use Yud-He Vav-He yet, because that was a name of God that wasn't revealed until later on. And the second chapter comes from another source, in which Yud-He Vav-He is used, quite extensively. This is the difference between what they call, the P text and the J text. The J text being characterized by the use of Yud-He Vav-He. So, but of course the rabbinic tradition doesn't say that, because they don't believe that. So what they said was, and this is very common, this is a very important point, that whenever Yud-He Vav-He appears, it is a use of the Midat HaRachamim, God's attribute of mercy. And whenever Elohim is used, it is Midat HaDin, God's attribute of judgment. So, the fact that both are used here in chapter 2, meaning God is both judge, but also that God has mercy, ruler and judge. That both aspects of God are, and don't forget, on the high holidays, that's one of the themes that we ask God to get up. The metaphors is we want God to get up off his throne of judgment and sit on his throne of mercy, which is why we recite the 13 on Yom Kippur, the 13 attributes of God's mercy, right? Adonai, Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, that verse from Exodus, which God says to Moses after the golden calf, if you recite this, then I'll be merciful to you in the future. Okay, so this is where it all comes from. All right, read on, verse 6. But a flow would well up. This is back to the text.
Okay. But a flow would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth.
Okay, now the word "v'aid" here is translated as a flow, but and it says "ya'aleh," meaning come up from the earth. He understands it as a mist. Go on, read the Rashi. And a mist ascended.
The mist ascended, concerning the creation of man. He brought up the waters of the deep and watered the clouds to soak the earth, and man was created, like the baker who puts water into the flour and afterwards kneads the dough. Here too he watered, and afterwards he formed man.
So in other words, the earth has to be soft like a dough, because God is now going to use the earth to form the human, so it has to be soft and pliable. So God has the water, a mist comes up, form clouds, which moistens and soaks the earth to make it pliable. Yeah, makes it into like a dough, or we would call it like clay, like a potter. Yeah.
But how does that fit with there was no rain until there was...
Don't expect 100% consistency. Again, he's quoting multiple midrashim here, and whatever fits the thing. All right, now read verse 7 in the text. The Lord God formed
man from the dust of the earth. He blew into the nostrils...
Into his nostrils.
Into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being.
Again, the Hebrew is ha'adam, which therefore you can say the man, or the human, or the earthling, which is what I prefer. One biblical scholar I know likes to say human from humus instead of man from, because he wants to get the alliterative connection between Adam and Adamah, right? From the dust of the earth, right? Et ha'adam afar min ha'adamah. Okay, that alliterative thing. So earthling is also good. Earthling from the dust of the earth. Okay, so now read it. And formed.
With two yuds, hints at two creations, a creation for this world and a creation for the time of the resurrection of the dead.
Right, the Hebrew has two yuds. Again, the extra yud is not necessary. So why is it there? To show that there are two creations, this world and the world to come when the dead will be resurrected. Go ahead, but in connection with the animals.
In connection with the animals which do not stand in judgment, two yuds are not written in
The word vayitzar.
Describing their creation.
Meaning animals don't get resurrected. They're not part of the final judgment. Which shows you why does Rashi even bother to mention that? There were some people who thought that animals did. Not very many, but there is a hint that some people believed that there may have been, Sa'adja talks about this in the 10th century in his work, the Book of Belief and Opinions, when he's talking about resurrection of the dead. And one of the things that he says is that animals who are slaughtered for kosher food, because they're killed before their time, might get to be, he floats the idea that they might get resurrected to sort of compensate them for the shortening of their life. It's a fascinating little, of course in Maimonides, it's like, forget it, no way. But there's evidently, it was a question, because it was a question that actually Sa'adja's book is often like question. He uses in the form of somebody asks a question and he's answering it, and somebody sort of asked about this. So there were people who were wondering whether animals are part of the resurrection of the dead. Yeah.
Is Rashi just out to explain every oddity in the writing of the Torah?
No, it's not an oddity. It's real issues that arise. Remember, the question that people, when they're studying Rashi, say, Ma kasher l'Rashi? What is bothering Rashi? And so what Rashi is doing is, he's taking those aspects of the text that require explanation because they're unusual, or they are important for a homiletical point, or what we might call a doctrinal point. Here he's talking about resurrection of the dead, which is a central idea of Rabbinic Judaism. So he's connecting it up to this text, in which, of course, he didn't originate it, but he's bringing it out. So it's not just he's looking for oddities. He's looking for contradictions to solve. He's looking for points that can bring out important moral homiletical points. And don't forget, he's writing this commentary and revising it his whole life. And as we mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, his grandson Rashbam said, Zeta, your commentary is really not pshat, despite what you said. And he said, yeah, I know that, Shlomo, I don't worry. If I had time, I would fix it. You know what I mean? In other words, he's trying to write this for people to understand the Torah. but he's within a certain tradition. On the other hand, he's part of a revolution in looking at Torah, which is, he can only go so far. His grandson goes much further, and so does, like Ibn Ezra in Spain, goes much further in this regard. Okay, read the next one. Dust from the ground.
Dust from the ground. He gathered dust from the entire earth from the four directions, so that whenever man would die, the earth would accept him for burial.
That's a really nice little homiletic point, that the earth is from all parts of the earth, so that it doesn't matter where a person's buried, the earth will accept them, as if to say the earth could say, hey, you didn't come from this part of me, so it's a fascinating little thing. Read on, another explanation.
He took his dust from the place of which it is said in Exodus 1:21, you
shall make me
an altar of earth. If only it would be an atonement for him, so that he might endure. Okay,
so in other words, every place where God's name will be revealed, which is what it says in Exodus, you can make an altar of earth. So he's making the point that the human, by taking from all these places, allows the fact that humans are made of the same as an altar of atonement, allows humans to atone. Okay, we're going to stop there. I was hoping we'd get to the next bunch of material, which we didn't, but I will hand it out anyway, and we will get to it. This is Rashi on the Akedah, and we will get to that next week. And the question is, I want to maybe do one other part of Rashi's commentary to the Bible, not from the Torah. I'll find another text. Anybody got a particular story you're interested in, maybe from other parts of the Tanakh? Think about it. Or I'll find something, and then we're going to look at his other writings in the last and sort of beyond. Okay, so I'm going to stop this here.
Thank you.